You close a door behind you. You sit down. A minute later, you flush, wash your hands, and walk away without a second thought. Nobody sees it happen. Nobody has to. You've done this thousands of times. You've never once had to think about where any of it actually goes. For almost the entire history of your species, none of that existed. No door, no seat, no flush. For roughly 300,000 years, one of the most basic acts of being human happened with no privacy, no plumbing, and no plan. So how did it actually work? And why, in some strange ways, might it have been safer back then than it was for thousands of years afterward? Right now, hundreds of millions of people around the world still have no toilet at all. So maybe the real question isn't why your ancestors lacked bathrooms. Maybe it's why you assume they ever needed one. Here's the strange part. Some of the best evidence about how ancient humans actually lived comes from what they left behind, in the most literal sense possible. Scientists call it a coprolite, a piece of fossilized feces that can survive for thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years, sealed inside dry caves or old campfire ash. It doesn't look like much. Usually it's just a dark, flattened smear in the dirt. But that smear can outlast almost everything else a person ever touches. In 2014, geoarchaeologist Ainara Sistiaga, someone who studies the chemical traces left behind in ancient soil, analyzed 5 of these fossils from El Salt, a site in Alicante, Spain, where Neanderthals returned again and again over thousands of years. The coprolites were roughly 50,000 years old. They turned up inside old cooking pits, fire pits that had gone cold and quietly become something else instead. Why there of all places? Think about it practically. A used-up fire pit is already a hole in the ground. It sits slightly apart from where people sleep and eat. It's more or less the same logic a camper uses today, picking a spot downwind of the tent. Sistiaga's team tested the samples for biomarkers. Chemical traces left behind after digestion, a kind of molecular fingerprint. One marker only appears when the body breaks down cholesterol. That's proof of meat. A second appears only when a gut has processed plants. Both were there. The Neanderthals at El Salt were not the meat-only brutes of popular imagination. Their bathroom habits are what proved it. Thousands of years later, and half a world away, the story repeats. In Central Oregon, archaeologist Dennis Jenkins spent years excavating a set of caves near the small town of Paisley. Inside, his team recovered coprolites dating back roughly 14,300 years. When geneticists, led by Eska Villerslev, extracted DNA from the samples, they found the oldest confirmed human genetic material ever recovered anywhere in the Americas, older than the Clovis culture long assumed to be the continent's very first people. That claim was too big to accept quietly. Other scientists pushed back, pointing out that DNA can shift between layers of ancient sediment over time, which might make an old cave look older than it really is. So Jenkins and his team went back, ran hundreds more radiocarbon dates, and had outside labs retest everything under blind conditions. The original age held up. Let that sit for a second. The earliest solid proof of who was living in the Americas and when did not come from a spear point or a skull. It came from what someone left behind in a cave over 14,000 years ago, because nobody ever came back to clean it up. So, picture it. A small band of early humans always moving, tracking migrating herds and ripening plants through the seasons. Children sleep near the fire. Someone keeps it fed through the night. There is no fixed camp to keep clean because there is no fixed camp. When someone needs to go, they simply walk to the edge of wherever the group is resting, downwind, away from the food, away from the water everyone depends on. The same instinct you'd feel doing it in a national park with no bathroom for miles. Within days, sometimes hours, the whole group moves on. Whatever was left behind stays behind, buried under rain and dust and time, in ground nobody will sleep on again. This wasn't unique to ancient humans either. Anthropologists Wurzelber Schwelbers, who study nomadic hunting and gathering groups today, describe almost the same pattern. A camp used hard for days or weeks, then abandoned completely, waste and all, as everyone follows the food to the next spot. You'll find versions of this pattern across much of the animal kingdom too. You generally don't eat where you sleep. You don't sleep where the ground has already been fouled. Moving on solves the problem before it becomes one. It's a strange kind of loophole. Waste never had the chance to build up because the people producing it never stayed still long enough to let it. Then, starting roughly 12,000 years ago, that changed. Groups of early humans began settling down, planting crops, and staying in one place for generations. You already know this part of the story as the beginning of civilization. Permanent homes, stored grain, the first villages and cities. What almost nobody tells you is that for something as basic as going to the bathroom, settling down didn't solve the problem. It created one. Once a village stopped moving, its waste stopped moving too. It piled up near the same houses, the same wells, the same fields, year after year. Piers Mitchell, a paleopathologist at the University of Cambridge, someone who studies disease in the bodies of people who lived long ago, has spent much of his career tracing exactly what that meant by examining parasite eggs preserved in ancient latrines and cesspits, holes specifically dug to collect waste, at dozens of sites across the ancient world. What he found runs against almost everyone's assumptions. You'd expect that once a civilization like Rome built real sanitation, intestinal parasites would finally start disappearing. And Rome really did build real sanitation. Public multi-seat latrines with rows of stone seats set side by side with no walls between them, covered sewers, aqueducts carrying clean water into cities, even laws against dumping waste in the street. So did it work? According to Mitchell's research, not really. Whipworm and roundworm, two parasites that spread through contaminated food and water, stayed just as common across the Roman world as they had been before Rome arrived. In some places, they actually became more common. All that engineering and the numbers barely moved. It gets stranger. Centuries later in medieval Cambridge, Mitchell's team compared local friars, monks living in monasteries with dedicated latrine blocks and hand-washing facilities, against ordinary working townspeople who had none of that. Logic says the friars should have been healthier. Instead, they were almost twice as likely to be carrying intestinal worms. Why would better facilities keep failing to fix this? Because good plumbing solved the smell, not the cycle. Collected waste was routinely spread back onto farmland as fertilizer, which sent parasite eggs straight back into the food supply. Shared latrines and unwashed hands passed infections from one person to the next just as easily as an open field once had. Civilization didn't remove human waste from daily life. It just made it permanent, concentrated, and easy to accidentally eat. Here's the twist worth sitting with. For this one narrow problem, your nomadic ancestors may have actually had it better than the first farmers, and even the first city builders who came after them. It took thousands more years and one particular civilization to finally break that cycle. Around 2600 BCE, roughly 4,600 years ago, cities of the Indus Valley Civilization, including Mohenjo-daro and Harappa in what is now Pakistan, built something the Roman world wouldn't match nearly as well 2,000 years later. Many houses had a dedicated toilet hole built right into an outer wall, connected to a covered brick drain running beneath the street. You flushed it by hand, pouring in a jar of water drawn from your own well. The drains were sealed with corbelled brick arches so the streets above stayed clean and fed into cesspits that were emptied on a schedule rather than left to overflow. It was arguably the most advanced sanitation system anywhere in the ancient world, centuries before anyone had heard of Rome. It worked for a simple reason. It separated waste from water and food at the level of a single home, not just at the level of one impressive public building. That distinction sounds almost too boring to matter. It might be one of the most underrated engineering achievements in human history, which brings this back to you. Closing a door, sitting down, flushing, and never thinking about it again. That 30 seconds of not thinking is not a small thing. It's the end product of roughly 10,000 years of trial, disease, and slow, unglamorous engineering, cesspits and sewer pipes and treatment plants built by people who will never know your name, quietly finishing a job your ancestors carried with them, one campsite at a time, for hundreds of thousands of years. Clean water and safe sanitation are still counted among the most effective public health advances in human history, right alongside vaccines, because of exactly this kind of invisible plumbing. And the job still isn't finished. Hundreds of millions of people alive right now have no toilet at all and have to do something close to what a Neanderthal at El Salt did 50,000 years ago. Find somewhere private, away from water, and hope it's enough. That number has been falling for decades. It hasn't reached zero. So the next time you close that door, sit down, flush, and walk away without a second thought, remember exactly what that missing second thought cost the human species to build.